Roth conversions bad for retirees? That's the question that is leading to more drama in the financial planning community. A few weeks ago, I covered a controversy around Social Security. Now we're talking about Roth conversions. So apparently another YouTuber recently posted that Roth conversions are the new annuity dinner pitch. Great for the seller, brutal for retirees. That sparked a firestorm. A well-known tax planning specialist fired back on LinkedIn. He said, "The advice from this video from a CFP is so bad, I couldn't resist calling it out." Then he listed a dozen reasons why Roth conversions could be game changers for retirees. Things like avoiding the widow tax, or the ability to hedge tax rate increases, or the ability to avoid and manage IRMA penalties, or the ability to manage the peaks and valleys of taxable income, or to help reduce future RMDs. So as I did with the video on Social Security, what I want to do today is cut through the noise and get to what actually matters for retirement. I'm going to show you how to evaluate Roth conversions, and at the end, I will give you access to the same software that I use to run the calculations myself. But first, my name's Kevin Lum. I'm a certified financial planner, and this channel is dedicated to helping 1 million people retire without worry. Before we dive in, I want to read you a quote from another financial advisor, Rachel Camp, that I think does an excellent job encapsulating what great retirement planners do. She said, "Financial advisors are probabilistic decision makers. Our job is making choices with unknown variables, and most people don't feel comfortable doing that." That was one of the best quotes I've read in years, because that's exactly what great financial advisors do every day. Great retirement planners are probabilistic decision makers. And here's the problem. Humans are terrible at probabilistic thinking. Let me just give you a very simple example about what I mean. If you flip a coin 5 times and you get heads every time, what's the chance of getting heads on the 6th flip? It's still 50%, but your brain screams that tails is due. If you get heads 5 times in a row, I'm pretty sure that's going to be tails on the next flip. But in reality, it's 50%. That's called the gambler's fallacy. And it's one of the ways that our brains fail at probabilities. In fact, if you want to be a great retirement planner, or honestly great at making decisions, I highly recommend reading a book by Annie Duke called Thinking in Bets. When planning for retirement, people often think in absolutes. Tax rates are going to go up. I'm not going to live very long. The market is going to crash, or the market is going to go up. But unfortunately, reality doesn't work that way. Retirement planning doesn't work that way. The reality is you have a high probability of living past the age of 85. The reality is that tax rates might go up, tax rates might stay flat, or tax rates might go down. Markets are going to have good years, and markets are going to have bad years in patterns that we can't predict. This is why you have to be good at thinking in probabilities to do great retirement planning. You have to be someone who can look at Roth conversions and do an evaluation and say, there's a 70% chance this Roth conversion is going to save you money, a 20% chance it's a wash, and 10% chance that you've been better off not doing a Roth conversion. And then a great planner is able to say, but here is why those odds make it worth doing. But most people struggle to think this way. We want guarantees. We want always or never. But when you're planning for retirement, it's not about certainty. It's about probabilities. Roth conversions are a perfect example of this, because the success or the failure of a Roth conversion depends on factors that we can only estimate, right? There are key variables that are going to make or break a Roth conversion. For example, your life expectancy, the future tax rate, the potential growth of an asset inside of a Roth, different income sources, Medicare IRMA brackets, future tax law changes, and we could just continue going on. And here's what trips people up. We want a guarantee. Should I do a Roth conversion? Yes or no? But the real question we should be asking is not, should I do a Roth conversion, but what's the probability that a Roth conversion improves my situation? And is that probability high enough to act on? And humans, we often freeze when faced with uncertainty. We either do nothing, analysis paralysis, or we make emotional decisions like, I hate paying taxes. There's no way I'm going to pay for a Roth conversion because I don't want to pay another penny in tax today. then I have to. And so what ends up happening is for many people, the question of should I do a Roth conversion becomes a bit overwhelming. Despite all the complexity, the core idea of a Roth conversion is quite simple. It means you choose your tax rate instead of somebody else controlling it for you. It's about controlling what you can control, even when you can't predict the future perfectly. Now, I should say there's another way to get to a similar outcome. You can either do a Roth conversion, you could just pull the money out of that IRA effectively using your tax brackets and put it into a taxable brokerage account, or you could pull that money out using your tax brackets effectively and spend the money. All three of those have a similar impact for the purposes of this conversation. But before we can go forward and talk about Roth conversions more, we need to understand required minimum distributions. If you already understand RMDs, go ahead and use the chapter title and skip to the next part of this video. But one of the things I've noticed on some of my other videos that I've done around Roth conversions is that I talk about, you have 750,000 at age 62, and at some point in your life, you're going to have a large RMD. And people say, look, I calculated the RMDs on 750,000. They're not that high. The point is, often when we retire, we have a chunk of money in our tax deferred accounts, be that 500,000 or 750,000 or maybe $2 or $3 million, right? Depending on your situation. But if you're not spending money from that account and it's invested in the market and the market continues to go up, that account value continues to grow from the day you retire until you're required by the government to take an RMD. When you reach your RMD age, the IRS uses something called the Uniform Lifetime Table to calculate how much you're going to have to withdraw from your account. At age 73, it ends up being about 3.8% of the account value. At age 80, it's about 5% of the account value. At age 85, it's 6.25% of the account value. At age 90, it's about 8.8%. At age 95, it's over 11%. The older you get, the bigger the forced withdrawal is going to be, potentially pushing you into a higher tax bracket, and you have little control. And when you get pushed into the higher tax bracket, you might be pushed into having to pay more for your Medicare surcharges and just might have to pay more money in taxes because now you're in a higher tax bracket. So that's the RMD issue, or that's what you need to understand about RMDs, right? If you're not spending enough from your account or your account is growing too quickly, you could end up having a large RMD later in life. So what I want to do is I want to walk through a very simple example showing you how choosing your tax rate today can save you tens of thousands of dollars tomorrow. So here we have Phil and Claire. They are retiring today. Phil is age 62. Claire is age 60. They need about $60,000 after tax, and they have about $850,000 in assets, $750,000 in an IRA, and then about $100,000 that they have in a taxable brokerage account or in their bank. And then the other piece of this plan is they have, Phil has at his full retirement age $3,000 in Social Security. Claire has at her full retirement age $2,000 in her Social Security. Now, one of the interesting things about Phil and Claire in this case is that because Social Security at some point is going to cover most of their living expenses and maybe a bit more, which is a common occurrence when people retire, particularly if they delay their Social Security benefit. One of the things we did is we went pretty aggressive with the investments in their portfolio. So what I want to do is I want to look at the impact of a Roth conversion, but also kind of help you understand what we're doing when we're doing a Roth conversion. Ultimately, what we are doing is we are controlling the tax bracket. So you could do a Roth conversion. Like I said earlier, you could just pull the money out and put it into a taxable brokerage account. Or if the plan supports it, you could spend the money. If you want to spend a lot of money early in the plan, in this particular plan, Phil and Claire have a lot of income coming in later, and maybe they want to do some big trips and do a lot of things early in their plan. The other thing they could do rather than a Roth conversion, they could just pull the money out and spend it. But I want to kind of dig down in and show you what this looks like. So here we have Phil and Claire. If we look at the heat map, we can see that it probably makes the most sense for them to convert up to the top of the 12% tax bracket, or to withdraw cash or withdraw money up to the top of the 12% tax bracket. So we can see here that doing Roth conversions could potentially save them about $900,000 and lower their effective tax rate for their retirement from 13% to around 2%. We could also come over here and say, yeah, that sounds great, but what does that look like in real numbers? And what you find is in real numbers, the tax savings drops from like 900,000 to about a half million, which is still a fairly significant savings. But I want to go over here and look at the tax brackets because I think this is really helpful. So what often happens when people retire is they're able to keep their income artificially low. They don't need a ton to live on. They often have some savings somewhere. And so when they first retire, they don't pull a lot of money out of their prior 401k or their IRA. And so they're not effectively using the tax bracket. So as you can see here, Phil and Claire are converting up to the top of the 12% tax bracket. So they are, the first few years, they are taking out more money than they need to, and they are doing a Roth conversion. As you can see here, if they weren't trying to effectively use their tax brackets, the first few years they're retired, they have some money in savings and cash in a taxable brokerage account, and there's no long-term capital gains. They don't pay any tax for the first couple of years of retirement. And then they pay 10% tax, again, less than what they would have to pay if they were doing Roth conversions. And then finally, they have to start pulling out a bit more to live on, and it jumps to 12%. And then what you see happen is they stop paying taxes. What is going on? So we have two different scenarios happening. In the first scenario, the blue line, they're doing Roth conversions or just effectively using their tax bracket. With the yellow lines, they're not doing anything, right? They're not trying to do anything. They're just spending their money. They're not doing any particular planning. And what you see in these scenarios is also just taxes disappear. What happens is they begin claiming Social Security, and that Social Security benefit, their income is low enough that Social Security benefit isn't subject to tax. And so they are feeling great about themselves, right? Because they're not paying any tax at all. And then what happens is all of a sudden RMDs kick in. And as those RMDs kick in, now they have to begin paying tax again. And what happens when those required minimum distributions kick in is it causes more of their Social Security benefit to be subject to tax. And so here you see that their tax rate stays about 12% tax bracket. And then in 2046, something happens. What happens here? Well, one of the things I built into the plan is that men often pass earlier than women. And so in this particular plan, we have Phil passing at age 85, and we have Claire living to age 95. So why would we have Claire live that long? That's a great question. And this is where probabilities come into play. In over 50% of marriages, one spouse will live to at least to age 92. That means there's a fairly significant probability that someone in that relationship is going to live into their 90s. And so therefore, this tax planning makes more sense. Now, if you're single, the probability begins to change a bit because it's no longer the probability for a couple, but for just your specific situation. But in this case, Phil passes. And so now Claire is left. Remember, she's 2 years younger than Phil, and she's going to live to age 95. She's left pulling out at the 22% tax bracket. And then what you see happens here, then she has to begin pulling out at the 24% tax bracket. Now, one of the things you'll notice here is that there is still some tax to be paid later in the plan, even if you do Roth conversions. Why? Because it did not make sense to go too aggressive on the Roth conversions. So by making some decisions early in the plan based upon the probabilities for this particular situation, we're able to control the tax bracket through the rest of the retirement. So even though we are going to have some taxes to pay later in the retirement, in fact, that probably makes sense in this situation, we are able to keep the tax rates way lower than if we had not done a Roth conversion. And what you'll see is throughout the life of this plan is that early on you have some taxes to pay, and then that tax bill gets massive because not only are you a single filer and not only are you in a higher tax bracket, but also IRMA surcharges begin kicking in at some point, and much more of the Social Security benefit is being taxed. And so it becomes a really large tax bill, even on an account that's not massive, right? If you take someone who has $2 million in a tax deferred account, this problem becomes even larger. So now we can go here and look and say, in this situation, this is using nominal dollars. In this situation, you save about $900,000 in taxes. So by using tax planning, in this situation, you pay about $86,000, $87,000 in taxes, as opposed to around $900,000 in taxes. And then the other thing you notice is also the net legacy value goes up because your heirs will also have to pay less taxes because of those Roth conversions. Now we could go up here and say, what does this look like in real dollars? Like I showed you earlier, it's not as impressive, but still it's the difference between $560,000 tax bill and a $77,000 tax bill. But what if one spouse doesn't live to age 95? What if they both pass early? So we can go over here and look at the plan. And what we see is that converting the top of the 12% tax bracket, if they both die early, could have cost them about $12,000. Inflation adjusted dollars, if we go back to nominal dollars, it's basically a wash. It's like $1,000, they'll say. Although even in this situation, there's still an impact to the net legacy. So even if they both die early, I think we have Phil dying at age 80 and Claire dying at age 78. Even in that situation, if they have heirs, that Roth conversion might end up paying off. But this is why when you're putting together a Roth conversion plan, it's not always a slam dunk. And we don't always do Roth conversions for clients because the probabilities are not always in their favor. If it is a married couple that has a significant amount of money in an IRA and they're pretty aggressive with their investing, that's a pretty easy decision. But if you have a single filer that doesn't have a ton of money in their IRA and doesn't have a big legacy goal, then it might not make sense to do Roth conversions. So you have to weigh these decisions based upon probabilities, right? And you don't always know what the exact numbers are, but something like, there's a 60% chance that this Roth conversion is going to save you a pretty significant amount of money. There is a 30% chance it's going to basically be at break even, and there's a 10% chance it's going to cost you money, and you have to make the decision. Is that 60% chance worth taking? Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I hope that was helpful. If you want to run your own numbers, the software I'm using in this illustration is Income Labs, and I think it does a better job of helping illustrate what I wanted to talk about today. But the other piece of software we use is called Right Capital, and we are able to make that available to you for a short period of time so you can kind of play with your own numbers. We can't make Income Labs available, unfortunately, although our clients do get access to it. But Right Capital is a phenomenal tool. I use it in a lot of my videos. Right Capital is really helpful when you're trying to think through Roth conversions. And so if you want to play with it and run your own numbers, you can get access using this QR code, or I will put a link in the description below. One thing I should tell you is that Right Capital has a fairly high learning curve, and we don't have the capacity to really provide any support. And Right Capital is not allowed to provide support to end users. And so if you're like, that sounds great, but I would like a little bit of support, I would highly recommend using Bolden. I think Bolden has an incredible software for modeling Roth conversions. There are things I like about Right Capital better, and honestly, there are things I like about Bolden better. I'm just more familiar with Right Capital. I know my way around it. But if you want more support, I think Bolden is a phenomenal option, and I will put a link in the description below. Actually, I'll also put a QR code here for Bolden as well. So we got multiple QR codes in this video. But thank you for watching. If your interest is piqued and you're like, hey, I love Roth conversions, or I want to learn more about Roth conversions, I have a whole video on 6 reasons why you shouldn't do a Roth conversion, and you can watch it now.